Welcome to Monday Scoop. I'm Georgia Raisman, and on Monday Scoop, I have short conversations with a variety of experts on issues affecting people over age 55. Whether it's food, health, style, or entertainment, we'll explore ways to lead better and deeper lives as we get older. Hello, I'm Georgia Raisman, and this is Monday Scoop. Today, I'm talking with Daniel Balling, a pharmacist here on Nantucket, owner of Dan's Pharmacy. And we're going to talk today about mostly things COVID-related, vaccine-related, and issues for people over age 55 dealing with this rather terrible pandemic. Well, Dan, first let's start with, how did you get to Nantucket, or have you always been on Nantucket?
No, golly, that's kind of a long story, but I came out here. I was actually visiting what is now my wife, then my girlfriend, that worked at Gary Trainer's Jewel of the Isle as a gemologist jewelry designer. And I was coming out visiting her on the weekends, and I was offered a job and on the weekends, and then it's progressed to a full-time job, and now I've been here 30-some years.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Western New York, in Hamburg, New York, outside of Buffalo.
So it was a pretty long journey to come visit a friend here on Nantucket.
Yes, in fact, I was just graduating from Mass College of Pharmacy when that started.
So how did you decide to establish a pharmacy here on Nantucket? I mean, there must have been others, and it's a pretty...
Well, for a long time, I was hoping to be able to open a pharmacy on Nantucket, and I worked at one of the other pharmacies for a significant number of years, I think like 12 years before I started my project.
Well, I know you have a really full-service one now, multi-floors and a very big building and on a big main street, so I think it's obviously been very successful for you. What we want to talk about today, since we're in this very fraught era of pandemic, is what you're seeing on the ground, both as a business person in this time and with regard to how this COVID is progressing as a disease that's affecting all of us, but especially people over 55. I know people's responses range from staying at home and not doing anything to going out and doing pretty much everything and disregarding even all sorts of government interdictions because it's my liberties and I'm going to do what I want. I mean, how do you view the scene right now before we get to...
Well, it's kind of amazing, in my opinion, how it has escalated to where it's at. I would have liked to think that it was going to go the other way and things were going to start tapering down as we entered the fall, and it's been the exact opposite, and in my opinion is escalating to a point where it's fairly risky business, especially in the age group that we're talking about, if you're not being proactive and aware of the things you can do to help prevent the spread of COVID.
Are you talking about normal public health measures like staying socially distant and wearing a mask?
All of the things that we hear about on a fairly regular basis, but the social distancing, the mask, I think, are very important. Hand washing frequently, and good health measures in general, good nutrition, drink extra fluids. If you're in contact with people with even common cold and or flu, immune boosting supplements wouldn't be a bad idea. In fact, it probably isn't a bad idea to try and be on the top of your nutritional health just to avoid all of it. And I certainly do recommend an annual flu shot. We're hearing that maybe it's more important than ever to possibly help deter maybe even COVID to some extent, or at least have your immune system up to speed.
As strong as possible.
As strong as possible.
I had an interview with Greg Margolis, as you know, because we're talking about nutrition in older people, and part of it is to keep your immune system as healthy as possible to be able to fight off this virus. When I was a little girl and I was a Girl Scout, we used to create these pomanders. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're an orange, and you take the orange and you stick whole cloves into the orange. And you know what a whole clove looks
Right,
like.
yeah.
And if you think of an orange with whole cloves in it, it's what this COVID virus looks like. It's
Right,
a
right.
round thing with the thing with sticky edges sticking out of it. So and that's how I visualize this horrible virus. And from what I understand about the vaccines that are being developed or have been developed for it, they attempt to attack this protein, this virus protein, in different ways. The two that are closest to being approved, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, use something called messenger RNA, which is a genetic way of replicating the gene in our genes, replicating this virus with another virus that will attack it. And they are unique in that approach, and they apparently have had extremely high success even among older people. And I gather that older people are not always as responsive to virus-based vaccines like the flu vaccine. So that has created a lot of excitement among science-based people. And then there are other vaccine candidates that release the virus in your body in different ways to attack this coronavirus. But I'm sure you have seen, as we all have, there's been, before this COVID, there's been so much pushback from people who are just anti-vax, that just are anti-pharma, that are, think that somehow or other pharma is an entity that's not, that is not, doesn't consist of people. Like
Right.
pharma is some robotic entity somewhere not consisting of scientists and people and workers who also get sick and want to cure themselves. And for that reason, do you worry at all that the anti-vax sentiment will spill over into people who won't accept vaccines, whatever their format is?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because in general, we are an under-vaccinated nation. So there are definitely people out there that don't believe in vaccines, that won't get vaccines. And these are vaccines that have been around for years and very well studied. A lot of data and information on safety and use. And now we're coming up with a vaccine that was pushed along quicker, has less of a safety profile. In my opinion, that might increase some people's thoughts of not wanting to get vaccinated, in my opinion. I think the fact that it's getting easier to get vaccinated, whether it be at your physician's office, at these hospitals, or areas like pharmacies, for example, that are more accessible to people to make it easier to get vaccinated. So getting vaccinated, I think, is important, and accessibility to the vaccine is important.
So there's reluctance because of this Operation Warp Speed, which is amazing success. I mean, vaccines normally take, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years to develop, and these have been developed in 9 months. It's just,
Right.
it's head spinning. So naturally, I mean, any thinking person would say, what can we really know about the ultimate side effects? I mean, maybe we know in 9 months we've studied 45,000 people or whatever, and we've only seen soreness at the site and fever and whatever else they say they've seen, but who knows whether in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years somebody's going to have some unlooked for,
Right.
unexpected side effect especially from something like a messenger RNA that
Right.
may have all sorts of ultimate effects that we have no idea of. And against that, you're balancing a disease that, maybe it has a relatively small death rate compared to other SARS-related diseases, but it has all sorts of other implications for your body in its
Right.
other systems that are terribly serious in many people. So anybody who's sensible, not just the anti-vaxxers, is going to say, this whole thing makes me a little nervous.
Right.
But the fact that it's there, and the fact that older people especially are facing a very scary disease, I think is going to maybe overcome the reluctance. I mean, if I were thinking about this as a person in my 70s, I would say, okay, maybe I won't worry about the 10-year down the road side effect that this might show, because 10 years down the road I'm going to be in my 80s, and that's a risk I'm willing to take. Whereas if I'm in 25, the 10-year down the road scenario is much more realistic. So
Yes, that is very interesting that you're mentioning that. And traditionally, I can say traditional vaccines have not been much of a problem with long-term adverse effects. Even short-term adverse effects have been fairly nil.
Well, that's interesting.
So I think the importance of being vaccinated is definitely there. I think as this unrolls, to decrease, or I should say to probably increase public awareness, would be a lot of information being put out there to the safety profile and the potential adverse effects, so that people have a greater awareness of the safety of the particular vaccine, and the fact that it was pushed out over such a short period of time with not a lot of adverse effects testing and time frame to see where the adverse effect profile could potentially go, is something that's going to be concerning to people. So I think awareness and product information being available to people will help them make the decision. If people, I always say, well-informed patients can make good decisions. So if we have information out there that people can use to evaluate what they're getting and the effectiveness and the positive results from it, then it should deter from the negative thoughts of not wanting to get the vaccine.
That's a very good point. The other thing that I think is interesting and unknown is that it's not known whether this is going to confer lifelong immunity like measles and polio, or whether it's going to be something you need to get every year.
Right.
So that's another, critical element. But assuming that one horribly gets this disease, there are a whole bunch of different treatment options coming down the road. Have you been thinking about that much, or have people asked you about that much?
A little bit. It'll be curious to see the availability on the remdesivir, and that affects the ATP, or the cell replication. So that product, if it's available and reasonably, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see the cost of some of these treatments and so forth also. But that does seem to be a fairly good treatment if it's available, and that affects the replication of the virus. It's not to be given, or right now it's recommended not to be given with hydroxychloroquine, which is being studied as a potential treatment also.
The hydroxychloroquine is one of those drugs that's used for a lot of people who have lupus and other autoimmune diseases, don't they? But it's one that has other side effects, heart side effects, or heart damage.
Could be cardiac side effects. In general, that's another medication that we don't, maybe there's more potential adverse effects in theory than in reality. Pretty much people being treated, and I haven't seen a lot of treatment with any of the medications, actually. A little bit of hydroxychloroquine. Haven't really heard of any major adverse effects that would limit the need to be treated, if you did need to be treated. If you're predisposed with cardiac issues, that's going to become interesting as this progresses along, because you would be more likely to have greater sensitivity to a COVID infection if you have any type of compromisation, respiratory, cardiac.
Right, so people who are older,
like
who
that.
already have some kind of compromised immune issues, whether it's anywhere from asthma to, I don't know, multiple sclerosis or
Cardiac diseases, upper respiratory infections,
Right.
things like that. I would think that group of people should probably be more concerned about making sure they get the vaccine. It's also going to be interesting how this vaccine's distributed. Is it going to get to the public in a reasonable amount of time? Right now, it's supposed to be kept at an extremely cold temperature. that in itself is going to be a challenge. Once it gets to the areas where it's going to be given, are people going to be able to store it properly? When I see people, I mean professional organizations like hospitals, doctors' offices, and pharmacies that are going to be
Now, are you ready to keep that, that's
administering.
Pfizer, are you ready to keep that Pfizer vaccine at minus 94 degrees?
I know we can keep it at minus 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's the Moderna.
We have
yeah, the Moderna ones.
sub-zero freezers.
Yeah.
Before the Shingrix vaccine came available, we used to have to keep the Zostavax in a sub-zero freezer, and it could only be out for about a half hour prior to administration. So I'm kind of seeing some of the same scenario come back with the COVID vaccines that are going to come out, and it'll be, again, interesting to see the shelf life of the available vaccine once it gets delivered and the different temperatures that it can potentially be kept at. It's probably going to be difficult to have freezers that go to minus 91.
Yeah, for any length of time. Yeah, and then it has to be used within a certain fairly short period of time too. I think I don't remember.
One of my other concerns is going to be the 21-day second vaccination.
Right.
So there's going to have to be a protocol
For getting people
set
back.
aside for the people that you do the first time
Right.
that you're going to be able to
Get them
give them
back.
their second vaccine.
Right.
And then, of course, costs will be interesting. They say it's going to be disseminated. I don't know if it's going to be no charge or if it's going to be a cost when it gets to the general public, and where it's going to go first.
Yeah.
So that all will unravel, I guess, as it comes available.
Yeah. I read recently that there was an approval of a home test for this, a rapid home test, but that you could get by prescription, and it uses some different methodology of testing than the lab test. Apparently, it, I don't know, grows this virus very, very fast and then tests to see whether it's there. The implication of that is that you could, if your doctor prescribed it, you could have it at home, and if you worried, you could
test yourself
right away. I mean, that's also.
Well, I think the availability of that will be very important, and it would be good to have on hand. It's kind of interesting. I haven't looked into the vaccines that would, or I mean the tests that would be publicly available. I know there is information out there about them starting to roll out tests that could either be at a pharmacy to come in and get tested, or certainly obviously at your physician's office, or potentially a home test. I know they're in the works. I just don't know a lot about them.
Yeah, I think that's very, very new. I think we're all suffering from COVID fatigue too, which is the other thing that I guess if you're really old and if you do have a compromised immune system, or you live with somebody who has a compromised immune system, it's almost easier to be absolutist about it and to say, this is the way we're going to live because we have no alternative. Somebody could die if they are inadvertently exposed to this. But if you're in that stage where you're relatively healthy, your immune system is relatively strong, you're willing to get a vaccine when it's available, and you're generally of an optimistic turn of mind, it's very easy to get tired of all of these restrictions. Even if you're willing to wear a mask and stay socially distant, it's very, very easy to get tired of I can't see my family, and I can't go anywhere for Thanksgiving, or they can't come, or what are we going to do about Christmas or Hanukkah or any of the other upcoming holidays. Are you hearing people talk about that in the environment of a pharmacy?
To some extent it is. I guess tiring could be a word. It's almost relentless that it's continuing, and it doesn't look like we have anything really more promising in the future. So it would seem like trying to comply to the rules that we have now to hopefully turn this thing around would be positive and a good thing. I think there are people that are tiring of it and are kind of over it per se. I think we probably should keep family gatherings to family. Keep our gatherings maybe smaller than usual. Be aware of distancing, wearing your mask, and doing the right things. If this continues to get worse and the vaccine doesn't start to turn things around, my opinion is eventually everybody will get COVID. Everybody will get COVID, and you'll either get through it or you won't get through it.
So it's a form of inadvertent or unwilling herd immunity.
What's that?
Unwilling herd immunity. I mean, some kind of herd immunity just because we'll all will have had it, and that will be that. But we don't even know a lot about herd immunity. We don't know whether herd immunity is something that will protect us all forever or just for this year. We don't know whether there will be a variant of this virus next year against which we won't be protected.
Right, and so there's so much unknown,
Yeah.
which makes it more difficult and more unpredictable, and probably more likely that the average person might not completely understand what's going on. And if there is a variation or a mutation in the virus, and all of a sudden everybody's been vaccinated against the primary vaccine,
Right.
we don't know if it's going to be helpful against a mutated vaccine. Which
It's the-
again would lead me to believe that if it continues to get worse like this and there's not a swing in a better direction, is everybody going to get COVID eventually? Or are there going to be people that escape COVID? There's people that don't even leave their house. And obviously we're very aware that public things are almost not happening. So we have kind of adjusted to a significant lifestyle change to hopefully accommodate for improvement in this COVID virus. And hopefully, I think people would like to see things get better instead of worse. And then our other groups of people, I think our 55 and older age group is probably very sincere about doing the things they can to avoid getting it, whereas maybe there's age groups, probably younger age groups, that are significantly less concerned about whether they get it or whether they transmit it. So there seems to be more likelihood that that potential group of people is more likely to transmit the disease, regardless of proactive measures to decrease the spread.
So I think we just have to hope that these vaccines work well enough and reach the right people soon enough. And I think they certainly were good news, and certainly the effectiveness is good news. So that's certainly had a boost on the stock exchange, if nowhere else, and maybe the economy, and hopefully that will help in Nantucket. The issue is going to be, as you said, distribution and the quantities available and how soon they are. It will be a miracle of modern science that these things were done so fast and so efficiently.
And let's hope that they're effective with little adverse effect. I
Yeah.
can say that we give hundreds of flu shots, and traditionally I don't really get people
Yeah.
complaining of adverse effects.
Yeah, yeah.
As far as other than a slight soreness at your
Right.
injection site. And
Right.
I mean, and that's pretty rare even.
Right.
Also, when it's fairly minor, it's almost like you bumped your arm and you have a bruise.
Right. Well, I think it may be one of those things where if you're a glass half full person, you think one way, and if you're a glass half empty person, you think another way. But I'm fully looking forward to this vaccine and expecting there aren't going to be any side effects from it. But I really want to thank you so much for coming and talking about this. It's a grim discussion, and I'm sorry we had to
Oh,
have
gosh,
it. But
no
perhaps
problem.
next time we talk, it'll be a happier circumstance.
Alrighty, if I could give one last statement, my thought would be to take some immune boosters or nutritional supplements just to make sure that you're on the top of your immunity. There's a variety of products available that you can get over the counter. immune boosting supplements right now, I think, are a very positive way to go.
That is an excellent suggestion, and thank you for making it. Well, thank you all for joining me on this week's Monday Scoop, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Are there topics you'd like to know more about? Email me at mondayscoop@gmail.com. See you next Monday.